Alright, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. In this one, it's going to be rather quick. I just wanted to go through the plugins that I used to master DRAY's song called One Night, which is out now on Source Records. Actually, let's do a quick A/B, so with plugins and without plugins, and to match the loudness, I'm also going to match the. So this is without anything. Obviously I didn't mix this one. This is only a stereo master, so obviously it's not going to be like groundbreaking difference, but hopefully the difference was audible when it comes to like compression, a little bit more brightness, but I'm also going to talk about it in a second. I used kind of a special trick there. Let's just go through the actual chain, and then we'll talk about like why I used which plugin and what's the purpose behind doing these things, because ultimately that's what matters. These plugins are basically, all of them are interchangeable with other similar plugins. What really matters is that the concept, and you understand what each of these plugins are bringing that the original to be mastered track didn't have. And starting off with the SSL eChannel strip emulation from UAD. As you can see, it's basically not doing anything. I have a little bit of this filter enabled, but other than this, I'm really just using it so that I have a little bit of this flavor that this plugin is already adding just by engaging the preamp section of it. And I also already prepared plugin doctor to show what I mean by this. So this is when the plugin is turned off. In the frequency spectrum, not a lot of things are going to happen. Like it's just adding this filter. Like obviously this thing is also getting engaged. So if I move it a little bit, like so, this is how it looks. This is what the filter is doing. So this is basically nothing compared to how it is turned off. It's not really doing anything. However, if you look at the harmonics that it's generating, this is also not groundbreaking because this is minus 175 dB. So that's not a lot. After this plugin, whenever I'm doing any other adjustment, I'm going to adjust these harmonics as well a little bit. So if I'm bringing up something, I'm bringing up these two. And this is what you kind of need to keep in mind whenever you're stacking plugins one after another, is that once you've added something first, every other maneuver that you do is going to affect that first plugin in the chain. Yeah, the next one is just this is not, I'm not even sure why this is here even, because this is not doing anything. Now the G-Bus, I talked about this many times, and also there's going to be another one later on. It's basically just once again, this is kind of the flavor that I want to give this track, and especially like with DRAY's tracks that are want to be like sounding like more vintage a little bit. This is just going to be the perfect tool for this type of job. Settings are once again not too crazy. It's really just to get the drops to go into a little bit of compression. Also, what I love about this one is that I have this sidechain option. What that means is that the compressor is not going to listen to signals under, like, let's say 70 hertz or so. It's still going to affect it. The waveform itself is going to be affected, but it's not listening to it in terms of like, whenever you have something spiking, for example, the kick drum is like boom, boom, boom. The compressor is not going to listen to that, but it's going to listen to the overall texture, like anything. Basically, how I set it up here is that it listens everything basically above the kick drum, and it reacts to that. And I'm never going to overboard, especially like I already knew at this point that I'm going to use two in the chain. Like, so I'm using this first one as a gatekeeper basically, and then I'm doing some other adjustments, and then I'm going to use another one to actually do all the fine-tuning details. So what this means is that I'm not going to overdo the gain reduction. It's either one of these are not really going to do more than 1 or maybe 2 dBs each. Next plugin in the chain, and again, I'm going to have another one of this one too later on. This one, the Vanley, in general, this is a tube passive EQ emulation. I personally like to use this on any other track, but especially with wannabe vintage sounding type of tracks, this is going to be the best choice. This is the plugin that I would say for vintage tracks It's like whenever you tweak a knob, you're going to hear what's in your head, what you kind of expect to hear. And after the Manly, I have the Zone Dynamic EQ. This one's not doing a whole lot, but it's doing one kind of important thing, which is that it's pumping up the kick drum frequencies a little bit. However, it's also reducing it like dynamically whenever it hits. The reason why I did this is because I felt that the kick was poking out a little bit. However, the low end in general, it wasn't moving me as much as it should have. So this is one kind of easy adjustment to do, is to find the frequency of the kick drum, like amplify that region, however, engage dynamic EQ. So everything else gets a little bit amplified in that region, but the kick drum gets reduced, like everything else with the kick drum as well. But if you set these kind of short times, like 2 millisecond attack, 40 millisecond release, your ears can be tricked a little bit into believing that everything is more even whenever you do these types of adjustments. Next one up in the chain is, this is a regular EQ. I felt that now the balance, or at least the perceived balance, because it's obviously a little bit of a trickery, but the perceived balance is something okay, but the low end still was not enough, so I pumped it up a little bit. And then also I felt that the high end can also be pushed up a little bit more. And so imaging adjustments, not a whole lot. I had it more like somewhere around this, but then DRAY said that he preferred to not have that much widening on the high end. He wanted to keep it like more narrow, and of course I dialed it back. Yeah, the next one is, as I've explained this earlier, I have another compressor in the chain. So this was the last thing. Like this one I added later after his first feedback. As you can see, like his feedback basically was that he wanted to have a little bit less high end and a little bit less width in the high end. For my taste, like even with vintage tracks, I'm kind of shooting for this, commercial, a little bit more poppy type of balance. And for DRAY, that was too much. So originally, this was the last plugin in the chain. What this is doing is that after these adjustments, it's a little bit evening out the whole track, because I also have had the pleasure to work with DRAY before. I also kind of know his taste in terms of like he prefers to have more dynamics than I would say is in the industry average nowadays. So I obviously didn't want to overcompress the track, but at the same time I wanted to control the dynamics a little bit. So what happens here is that it's barely going to touch these breakdowns. So if I were to print the track, the waveform would look kind of similar. However, whenever the drop hits, that's going to get reduced a little bit. So it's again, you can see the metering not doing anything significant. It's really just that it's adding a little bit more rounding out the whole track. Because the high end was too much. I did not want to... So there's difference between high end reduction and high end reduction. You can achieve the same thing by doing it very plainly, and you can achieve that thing doing it in a way where you're also adding more color, if this makes sense, instead of what you're taking out. And this was my goal here, basically. I'm going to engage and disengage this unit, so without the limiter for now, and the difference is going to be extremely subtle, but hopefully you'll be able to hear it, what's happening here. As much as the high end is reduced, there's a little bit more color in the place of it. It's great, especially in these higher end frequency regions, because of this added harmonics that it just generates because of the nature of how it's how this unit is operating in the real world. It's also like very well translated into this plugin form. Even though I reduced the high end like pretty significantly, like this is cut I think close to 3 dB, and even I have this filter engaged at 20k. This is pretty significant how much I'm taking away from the high end. It really rounds out everything. This is what I wanted to show DRAY first, and he also agreed with me, because so this what I said about like difference between doing two things. It's like I could have just done this, or I don't know. This is also reducing something from the highs, but it's or maybe like this is a little bit more more transparent sounding. So something like this to round it off, but it will like a surgical EQ without any added color from these kind of emulated things. It's just never going to sound the same way how something like this would. As I said, DRAY agreed with me, and so this is the final version that he ended up releasing. And one last thing is that I personally prefer to go for a little bit higher loudness, a little bit less dynamic range. But what I've explained it earlier, I just know that DRAY likes a little bit more dynamics, and he doesn't really care much about loudness. And to be honest, it's pretty fair, because like nowadays, especially when most of the audio consumption is happening on Spotify, Apple Music, like whatever, like the loudness levels are compensated there. So everything is basically sounding at the same volume. So there's, not really a whole lot of point anymore to push for more loudness, unless obviously you want to compete on, let's say, SoundCloud, where you still have this kind of wild west of of dynamics on regulation. But even YouTube has now a pretty clever way to kind of adjust the audio so that nothing really sounds super all that much louder than something else that you were watching before. I personally would have gone for a little bit more loudness, but this is perfectly fair. So yeah, like this drop is around -10. I would say my average drop is going to be -6 or -7 lately. I'm honestly lately I'm also not going that loud because I just don't really feel the need. The loudness that I feel is right for the track is mostly going to be at the point where whenever the output limiter is eating enough so that it feels a little bit like a compressor, but it's not eating enough so that it generates pumping or distortion or like these not so pleasing artifacts of its nature. Just to summarize this video real quick, first plugin is just there to add this ground flavor, so to speak. So whenever I'm adjusting anything else after it, it's going to also get adjusted with this added harmonic content. Then I have a little bit of a bus compression, then windage sounding EQ. Once again, this is a little bit more about flavoring than actually correcting anything surgical, because later on, if I need to correct something with surgical EQ type of procedures, I'm going to use either this Ozone 9, the Fab filter is like also great. I'm generally not really going to use the Fab filter Pro Q3 on the master unless I set it to linear phase mode. If I don't want to do that, then I kind of prefer to use the Ozone 9 on the master whenever I need this a little bit more, I would say, but this is also not super surgical or whatnot. These are just a little bit more correctional moves instead of doing something like this. Using an EQ like this is always going to be a tiny bit more broad how you're approaching this, especially because the steps are like the steps are not too big, but at the same time they are still logged in. You cannot go to in between those two steps, so you will always need a little bit of a correction. These are mostly there to give you this flavor that you want to work with later plugins. And the little bit of mistakes, I would say, like this is a bad word, but so the little bit of things that you cannot correct just by using this one plugin, you can always correct with another one later on with a dynamic EQ or like a regular EQ. So it's not really that big of a thing. However, with these completely neutral sounding units like the Ozone 9 or the Fab filter, you are going to have a tough time replicating the harmonic content that this plugin, for example, would add. And so yeah, what I've just explained, I'm also there going to have a little bit of a dynamic EQ action, normal EQ action, and then there's a little bit of imaging going on. Like you can see, it's not doing a whole lot. It's just these two ranges. In most cases, I'm not so about imaging in general. Like these ranges, like the bottom range where the bass lives basically, and then this range one higher, I would say from 100 to 300 is like usually how I dial it into this particular plugin. But it changes from track to track, obviously. But this is where the musical instrument foundational notes will live, and these are usually the overtone regions. And I tend to separate these into two, but basically I could just treat them as one. But the main point is wherever these foundational things are happening, you want more clarity and a little bit narrower things. So it's very rare that you would need to like boost this. If anything, you might need to take away from these regions from time to time. And then there's another compressor. This is basically just to catch the additional stuff that needed to be caught after all these adjustments, and then to react to his feedback about the high end being a little bit too much, I engaged this unit, and this just perfectly rounded off everything. Yeah, the last one is just the output limiter. Maybe if something's not clear about these plugins, or you just have additional questions, maybe leave a comment or like shoot me a DM over on Instagram, and yeah, I'll try to get back to everyone as soon as I can. And yeah, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.